After the parliamentarian victory during the Civil War, the king was put on trial. He wasn't executed summarily, but was put in front of the commissioners in Westminster, and they voted and discussed on whether the king was guilty of not upholding the law and of betraying the nation, and they decided he was. And so once that verdict had been passed, they all signed the death warrant, which is on display here, and you can see all, well, 59 of their signatures, and also their little seals, almost like drops of red blood, ranging across the bottom of the parchment. And you can even make out Oliver Cromwell's signature, the third one down, very, very clearly.
What about the Charles I's death warrant, which we also saw in the exhibition? I mean, what does that mean for us today in terms of democracy, and what does, the modern day monarchy mean in terms of democracy? I mean, does it have, non-democratic underpinnings, for example?
In terms of the Charles I death warrant, it was a fantastic moment. We managed to remove the monarchical head of this country, to remove almost the embodiment of anti-democracy. These people were supposedly have a kind of hereditary right to rule over others. The very fact that we restored a monarch, I think, is perhaps one of the sadder tales to emerge from that particular part of the exhibition. As for the monarchy today, it's not a particularly, or it doesn't feel a particularly radical gesture to dismiss the monarchy. They really do seem like posh fools more often than not. Although they don't actually seem to have that much power, they still have the ability to dissolve Parliament in the event of any civil strife. It is just the embodiment, if you like, of an anti-democratic, authoritarian, but latent impulse at the heart of the contemporary body politic.
Tim, if we were having this exhibition, let's say in the United States, one of the documents that would have been included is the Constitution. Now, we don't have a written constitution, and does it matter that Britain doesn't have a written constitution?
I think one of the problems with talk of a written constitution, or certainly the demand for a written constitution, much in the same way that there seems to be a demand right now for a new Bill of Rights, is that who exactly will be doing the writing? I suspect there'll be a nominal attempt at sort of input, but I suspect just consultation sessions, as opposed to sort of genuine documents, and that exhibition is full of genuine documents that express or capture moments of striving, of people struggling to realise their interests. This talk about sort of having a written constitution or these dreams of a new Bill of Rights, they would almost just be kind of dreamt up apart from people's interests, apart from people's demands. They would just be products of a kind of a technocracy as much as anything else.
Something that comes up in the comments board at the end of the exhibition, which has been really well populated with people filling out cards, is Britain's engagement with the world. This heritage of human rights, or this heritage of freedom, have we lived up to it in recent years, and are we living up to it now? And that's the real question on everybody's lips and minds as they leave, I think.
The exhibition gives a lot of importance to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and of course this also feeds into the idea, or it also is sort of representative of the fact that certain rights were fought for and other rights were given. And this declaration, which seems to offer rights to the people, also we found was quite hypocritical at some times, or in certain points, especially if you take into context what sort of things were going on in both the United Kingdom, in America as well.
Of course, you're right. In the 1950s, you still had massive racial segregation in many states in the US. Britain itself was still heavily involved in colonising vast swathes of Africa, and yet these particular nations felt that they were able to articulate what should be a universal human right, despite the fact that their own practices seem to directly contradict that moral authority. It also, again, it sort of exemplifies that distinction between rights that we demand and rights that we fight for, and rights that are sort of dreamt up or formulated apart from us in offices, I suspect, full of legal experts and lobbyists, and then perhaps in the UK you probably have the Lords thrown in for good measure.
I have several favourite items really in the exhibition here at the library, one of which is a loan from the Women's Library, and it's Emily Davidsons' purse, which she was carrying about her when she fell under the King's horse at the Derby, and then of course died a few days afterwards. And there's long been debate about whether she intended to kill herself or whether she just intended to perhaps stop the race or pull down the King's horse. But, well, there are two things about it really. One, that there's a return ticket to Victoria Station in it, which has caused some people to speculate she didn't plan. She did think she would return. She didn't think that she would die. But the other thing, of course, is the immediacy, the fact that here's an actual very small purse she was carrying about her, and the fact that people were willing to sacrifice their lives for what they believed in. And indeed the whole suffragette section is a fascinating case and really brings that struggle home, and also raises the question of how far people are willing to go for their beliefs. The fact that they were willing to cause disturbances and even violence in some cases. But of course they were fighting for democracy, for rights, for freedom, for an extension of liberty rather than repression of liberty.
Can we just talk a little bit more about this sort of this idea of, you know, the difference between the struggle for rights and rights being given to you from above? You know, for example, you have the suffragettes movement where, you know, women were very passionate about having equal representation to men in all aspects of society. I mean, you know, you had people like Emily Davidsons throwing herself under the horse, and then you can contrast that with the welfare state where, you know, as far as I know, I mean, people weren't going around asking for the welfare state. I mean, yes, they wanted jobs, they wanted houses, they wanted food and a decent life, but they weren't going out asking for, you know, the welfare state the way the suffragettes were asking for women to have full rights.
I think that contrast was apparent throughout the exhibition. Aside from those sort of grand elite documents, like the Bill of Rights and Magna Carta, you also had these other documents which were products of, you know, really hard struggle. You know, for instance, like the London Corresponding Society, they were radicals and reformists during the 1790s, which was a particularly sort of incendiary time, you know, not least because of the French Revolution. So threatening were their demands that the elite, far from giving them any rights, set about persecuting them. They arrested and tried for treason the head of the London Corresponding Society, a guy called Thomas Hardy, not that Thomas Hardy, a completely different Thomas Hardy. At the same time, Thomas Paine, The Rights of Man, which is now just considered to be a Penguin classic. 200,000 copies had been sold during the 1790s, but it was banned. It was considered seditious. So you have that contrast between these struggles which were considered a threat to the status quo, a threat to the state, and you then have these examples which are put within the exhibition, put in the same tradition, like the welfare state, where the state is simply sort of given, often because there's been a need they need to deal with. Certainly after the Second World War, there was there was a massive kind of social problem facing them. Not to mention the strength of the labour movement at that point. To place that state given right in the same context as these popular struggles for freedom is to do those struggles for freedom and injustice.